Chair has determined that there is a quorum. Unlike past meetings where we had the minutes to deal with, we're still working through, and I'm looking forward to hearing if there's any resolution on how we're going to get the minutes done. But we'll pass on that for the moment. Fortunately, there is video of this in the past meeting, so we'll be able to reconstruct it. But as far as I know, and Dave, unless you know something I don't about resources that haven't materialized since the last meeting, we don't have anybody doing the minutes. I'll just go on the record as saying, as everybody at the state knows, the Secretary's office is supposed to provide those resources. I know they're working through it, and fortunately, there is videotape. So that will solve that. So speaking of you, Dave, why don't we start with you? And I've been asked to remind everybody, first, that these microphones actually do work, and you can push them on and off, which may sometimes be a good thing. And second, I've been asked to remind you to please talk into them when you speak. So Dave, if you don't mind with the little update, and I know others may speak as well.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As I normally do, I'm going to read these verbatim as I'm here representing the Environmental Secretary as well as the Interagency Work Group. So these minutes are not something that I prepare. I'm sorry, these talking points are not something I prepare. So I'll just read through them, and I think as we normally do, if the chairman wants to open up to questions or if anyone on the panel has questions, please feel free. Additionally, is Sam here today? Okay, because we did have one or two items that were better left to Jack or Sam to speak to towards the end. So beginning with the status of the work the Commonwealth is doing through the Attorney General's office with the assistance of EEA and the other state agencies, we're continuing to pursue multiple legal proceedings as it's related to the NRC's decision to approve the license transfer from Holtec, from Entergy to Holtec, and the unconditional exemptions that allow Holtec to use Pilgrim's Decommissioning Trust Fund for non-decommissioning purposes. And following, I'll just run through quickly a summary of those actions, and as has been pointed out to me in the past by Pilgrim Watch, please don't lose track of the fact that I am not reporting on the actions that Pilgrim Watch is undertaking, and they are also actively taking various actions. And I suppose they may report out on that towards the end of the meeting during the citizens' comment period. So on December 3rd, 2019, the Commonwealth filed a motion to amend its petition for a hearing before the NRC to include the new delayed partial site release date of 2017, which Holtec announced during the November NDCAP meeting. Recall that we saw an overview from Holtec that provided that date. Entergy and Holtec objected to this motion, and the Commonwealth submitted its reply on January 14th, 2020, and essentially we are pointing out that we believe at least that some assumptions on costs were made based on a date of 2025, not 2027. On December 17th, 2019, the NRC formally denied the Commonwealth's request for a stay of the license transfer and trust fund exemption approvals. The Commonwealth expects to soon file a new petition in the Federal Court of Appeals in DC Circuit, seeking review of the denial and other related decisions. So that's the process. We first go to NRC to appeal the action of their staff to their commission, and then it goes to DC Court if we don't have a satisfactory outcome. The original petition to intervene in the license transfer proceeding filed by the Commonwealth on February 21st, 2019 remains pending before NRC. And lastly, the Commonwealth's petition asking for Federal Court of Appeals in DC to review the NRC's decision to approve the license transfer and trust fund exemption requests and make those approvals immediately effective remains pending in front of the DC Court. The NRC and Holtec have filed motions to dismiss the petition. On January 10th, 2020, the Commonwealth filed its opposition. In the interim, the NRC has granted additional requests for exemptions from NRC regulatory requirements, including a request to reduce the 10-mile emergency planning zone to the site perimeter, as we discussed, I think, last meeting, by April 2020, and certain cybersecurity and insurance requirements. That might be new information for tonight. And as we talk about most meetings, the Commonwealth remains open to a comprehensive settlement with the company to resolve the pending litigation. And we're in discussion for that. So emergency planning, I'm going to just touch on it briefly, and hopefully Sam will arrive and she can speak to it in more detail if we need to. MEMA is continuing to meet with local partners to prepare for the changes in emergency replanning protocols after spring 2020. And for now, MEMA is advising local partners to rely on the same calendar of events issued last year for years 2019 and 2020. The understanding is that Holtec is engaged in negotiations directly with municipalities regarding the issue of continuous emergency planning funding. And lastly, I'm going to give a quick overview, and Jack Priest may want to add in if I don't cover it adequately. The Department of Public Health notified local boards of health that potassium iodine tablets will not be resupplied for communities in the Pilgrim Emergency Planning Zone on Cape Cod, Martha's Vineyard, or Nantucket. And potassium iodide is no longer needed as a protective measure now that there is no risk of a radioactive iodine release with the cessation of active nuclear power generation. Emergency managers for the Plymouth EPZ were verbally notified in December. This change was made pursuant to an NRC notification to FEMA, Department of Public Health, and MEMA. I don't know if Jack was adequate, or do you want to add anything to that?
That's it.
So that's all I have for this, this meeting.
Any questions from the members of the panel? Yes, Rich.
David, have you been in discussion with Sam regarding the discussion we had at the November meeting regarding the disposition of the emergency planning calendar for businesses and residents within the 10-well EPZ? I think there was some email and going back and forth after that meeting, and Sam, I think, was trying to follow up on that, and that's as far as...
You know, I can't add anything to that.
Sam just
Nice try, Sam.
So,
Perfect timing.
We've already been talking about you for 5 minutes.
so maybe we'll just, why don't we give Sam a moment
Sure.
to get
Yeah.
planted?
Yeah, she can.
And I can just, sort of as Sam sits down and gets comfortable, I can just
Okay.
reiterate, Sam.
I know
that I-
Patrick said at the meeting that there was no plan or intention to create an additional calendar for 2020, but there was some ensuing follow-up on that.
Yeah, so the calendar, I did follow up. It is technically a 19 and 20 calendar. It's incredibly confusing because it ends in December. So we have pushed out a lot of public information on our website for, to remind residents to just hang on to their calendars through April. We have extras if we need to help get them out to local communities. So all the local emergency management directors are aware of that too.
Oh, that's all I have.
Sam, did you have any other comments to make regarding the emergency planning zone issues?
I mean, not issues. You know, we sent a letter saying that we didn't agree with scaling back the EPZ. And, you know,
Have you received a response?
no.
Okay. Okay, thank you. Any other questions from the panel? Okay. I first want to apologize. As you may recall, Kevin ran the last meeting, and he's got the cards. Kevin's tied up in a business meeting at the moment, so it'll be difficult. We'll tell you, if you want to know who we are, we'll tell you for those that don't know. So I apologize for the lack of name cards. A couple of sort of housekeeping items before we get into our guest for the evening, Mr. Blanch. The first is the next 2 or 3 months, as we had discussed last year, we're really trying to focus on dry cask storage and the issues related to that. This has been in the works, as you guys will recall, for some time. And I will point out, and Pat can offer a comment on this if you'd like, we had an agreement from the previous manager, Brian Sullivan, both in writing and verbally, to come in and give us a detailed, and I've got emails fortunately. Unfortunately, Holtec decided that they wanted to politely decline to come in and talk about it again. Pat was kind enough to distribute again the PowerPoint presentation that they had previously provided. I think, and this is just a personal opinion trying to put all this together, that it would have been much more advantageous to hear both sides and correct any inaccuracies, or at least offer opinions that are different. That didn't happen. It wasn't for our lack as a panel of trying, and it was a result of perhaps a difference of opinion within Holtec after Mr. Sullivan left. In addition to that, the NRC is trying desperately to have a representative, Doug Tift, on their staff locally is coordinating, come in next month and talk to us about NRC regulatory issues relating to dry cask storage. The NRC has been terrifically responsive. I think we had a combination of scheduling issues as well as holidays coming up and passing, but that's where we are. So unless there's serious disagreement among the panel, I still think we should devote our first sort of quarter of this year to digging in and learning as much as possible and questioning as much as possible about dry cask storage. I think we should. And unless there's an opinion to the contrary, I'll continue as the chair to pursue that to get those lined up. Okay, thank you. The next housekeeping item. As many of you know, there is a number of legislative proposals and bills pending before the great and general court. Representative Muratori from Plymouth has been excellent at keeping an eye on all of this for us, and called me shortly before the meeting to give me an update, and subsequently has sent me a list of those bills. Next Wednesday will be the first hearing before Chairman Golden's committee, Telecommunications. Obviously, Representative Muratori doesn't know how that hearing will turn out, but I will get you tomorrow morning. I will email you a copy of all of what I've just received, so you have it. You know, I think we'll have a better sense once you see it, but it's all the same bills, including the legislation regarding the construction and the voting rights of the panel itself. So nothing's happened on them yet. It's going to the hearing, first hearing next Wednesday. Then we're honored tonight again to have the chairman of the Plymouth Selectmen, Ken Tavares, here with us. Mr. Mahoney can't join us, so the chairman was like, did you want to give any update on, from Plymouth's perspective and conversations, Mr. Chairman? If you do, just use that microphone there. And
Thank you. Good evening, panel. From the town's perspective, we had started meetings with Holtec. They had a change in management and the holidays came, so we've had a break. But we are going to start again in February, having regular meetings on a monthly basis with the company. They've been cooperative in making the time available. Also, I want to publicly thank them. As you heard, we had a few problems with a few fire stations, and we were looking to house one company, and they were very cooperative at one piece of property that we were looking at. In the end, we didn't have to do it, but I did appreciate the cooperation of the company, you know, to come forward and help us if need be. So we're anxious, since Mr. Sullivan left, we're anxious to get back with them. We also made it clear at our last meeting that we want to meet with senior management off-site, and I hope that that will take place sometimes this spring. We think it's very important for us as the town of Plymouth to have a face-to-face meeting with the main principals of the company. Okay?
thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. One other topic that'll probably come up in new business, but in case Kevin gets further tied up, and correct me, Mr. Chairman, if I'm wrong, but the Board of Selectmen received and reviewed recommendations from the Town Planning Office about additional town activity in regulating that, large trucks, loads over town roads. There's a whole series of items in it that Kevin will go over probably under new business if he arrives in time. Does that accurately summarize what or did you want to comment?
It does. The Board of Selectmen took a formal vote on Tuesday to recommend this action, and the detailed report that the planning board put out to town meeting.
Yep.
So we will be presenting that this spring.
Okay. And I think if you haven't already gotten a copy of it, I'll make sure that you do get a copy of the actual bylaws that are proposed by town planning. Okay. Any questions? Hearing that,
Question?
yes.
Question through the chair. Having read the bylaw, and I agree with the bylaw, any detrimental effects on the town should be borne by Holtec in the pursuit of its business, and I'm sure they somewhat agree with that. But from the subcommittees and from the prior Nuclear Matters Committee that worked for the good selectmen, we had always emphasized the use of the barge berth for the removal of materials. And we don't know if the planning board was aware of that in the formulation of their bylaw. Anything that can be done to affirmatively propose that or consider that, at least for its consideration, I don't think should go by the wayside because of their good work. All right, thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments on that? Okay, so we're a little bit ahead of schedule. I'm going to start for Mr. Blanch, his presentation, but first, let me give you a little background, and he'll expand on his credentials and experience and expertise. He is a recognized national energy consultant. He's worked on a number of nuclear facilities across the country in a consultative basis, as well as an employee. He's very, very familiar with the NRC and the processes there. He's currently been engaged in a number of the projects, including California's difficult project at times. In addition to that, he's got some very strong opinions from a technical basis. He's an engineer by background. I'll let him go into that further. So with that, I'll start your PowerPoint, Paul, and you can feel free to. I can do them all.
Let's see, can I operate the, oh, you'll start. Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, committee members. As Sean told you, my name is Paul Blanch. I reside in West Hartford, Connecticut, about 2.5 hours away, and been involved in many nuclear issues over my many years, and my interface with the NRC really started right here at Pilgrim somewhere around 1989, I think. It was when I discovered some major safety problems, and that was the beginnings of my changing career. And I'm not biased. I'm, not pro-nuclear, not anti-nuclear. I'm very much pro-safety, and after working with the Nuclear Regulatory Commission for 30-plus years, I got to admit there's a bias there that they're not responsive to the concerns of the public. They're more concerned about keeping the industry alive. And as Sean said, I've got many years' experience, and I thought back when I was putting together this little slide presentation, I'm going to try to stay within my 30 minutes and allow for questions. That back in the late 1960s, I spent many months, hundreds of feet under the water, avoiding detection by Soviet submarines. During this time, I worked, I operated, I maintained, and slept within 100 feet of a U.S. Navy power reactor. At that time, I felt perfectly safe, and much safer than I would feel residing in the vicinity of Pilgrim or any reactor undergoing the decommissioning controlled by Holtec with the NRC's oversight. And I see here is a definition of oversight is not the normal definition. It's unintentional failure to do something. that's the way I see the NRC's oversight. And I don't mean to certainly attack any of the people within the NRC, and I think most of them are good people who want to do the right thing. So going on with that, I'll get a little bit into what I see to be my pertinent experience. I said 40 years in nuclear and regulatory experience. It's actually about 55, but BS degree and a professional engineer. And a professional engineer is in the state of California. It's in control systems. That's what my certificate says. Now, control systems means the monitoring, control, protection, safety, all the instrumentation, all the sensors that are designed to protect another system, be it an airplane, a nuclear reactor, an ISFSI system. So I've got a very good background on control systems, instrumentation, and so on and so forth, and what the regulations are. I've worked at Maine, Yankee, Millstone, Indian Point, all for the chief nuclear experts, chief nuclear officers. Can't see that. Right now, I'm engaged as a professional expert for San Onofre ISFSI. I have been a technical consultant for 7 years for the New York State Attorney General on the relicensing of Indian Point. Westinghouse and Control Magazine awarded me Engineer of the Year. I was a reactor operator and instructor. Again, helped Pilgrim resolve their problems with their level monitoring Rosemont transmitters back in the late 80s, early 90s. Accepted by numerous courts as expert witness, not only on nuclear technical issues, but also whistleblower issues, and also gas line. I've testified before the United States Senate. I think I'm reasonable, analytical, and sometimes cynical when I say some of the things, but don't be surprised if I come out with some cynical comments. What I'm going to talk about tonight is safety, regulatory, and engineering at Pilgrim. And this is an overview of, I believe, what's presently there at Pilgrim. You see a dozen or more casks out in the open, and inside of each of these casks are the most toxic material on the face of the earth. Millions of curies, which probably meaningless to most people. I can tell you it's a lot. And that one curie will kill a person without any problem. But there's millions and millions of curies in each one of these, and I have a breakdown in one of the future slides. The overall problem I see with this decommissioning in Holtec, let me just get mine. Holtec is designing and constructing a facility to contain thousands of tons of the most toxic substance on Earth, located right here in Plymouth. The NRC has been very reluctant to provide any meaningful lab oversight, and I get this from reading thousands and thousands of pages that form the current licensing basis, like the FSAR, Aging Management Program, compliances, standard review plan, thousands and thousands of pages. In my opinion, and this is somewhat unbiased professional opinion, that the cast design and engineering are severely deficient. There is no meaningful accident analysis or aging management program. And by the way, every statement that I'm making here is well supported by government documents that I can certainly share if they want to know where'd you get that information. These casks have a very limited, unspecified, and undocumented lifetime. We hear 15 years, 25 years, 60 years, 100 years. The problem is, Holtec has made some statements along the lines, we've got 1,600 canisters out there, we've never had a failure. Well, you could have failures, but if you're not monitoring for pressure, temperature, radiation, moisture, and so on and so forth, you could have all kinds of failures existing, but you're never going to see them. That's a big problem. No capability to inspect, as admitted to by Holtec, to monitor or ever repair these casks or canisters. There's no technology or plans exist to ever relocate this high-level waste. When I say high-level waste, I'm talking about the spent fuel plus the greater than Class C waste, which are the reactor internals that are, very highly radioactive, not quite as bad as the spent fuel itself. But I think everyone needs to recognize this is going to be here for a long, long time. I can't predict how long, but there's no technology to ever remove it. And they're planning on some future unknown technology to somehow repair and get this out of here. There's absolutely no consideration given to terrorist attacks. And the big question is that, here we are 20 years from now, and, a cask has a leak and is contaminating the area. No one has any idea who's going to do what and who's going to be responsible. Financially responsible, technically responsible. Is the NRC going to come in here and fix it for you? I don't think so. Will Holtec still be around? Yeah, probably, if you can ever find them. We just don't know who's going to be responsible 20 years from now. We're kicking it down to the next generation. And personally, I don't like that for a lot of reasons. I'm not a government fan anyway. But let's look at what we do with low-level waste. And low-level waste is essentially defined as, tools and clothing and other things that are produced in the reactor site that are less contaminated. There could be some radioactive gases, but this is from the NRC website. And it's, shows a low-level waste. This is how our government treats low-level waste. And we can see it's underground, it's got drainage, protected visually. And these are systems, I believe, that are, in Texas, down in, I'm not sure where else they are, but this is what I consider to be a decent way to dispose of low-level waste. Typically, low-level waste is, maybe 100 curies, but high-level waste, we're talking millions and millions of curies. So our government and our utilities and our industry says, okay, we've taken care of the low-level waste, so here's our high-level waste. This is how we're going to take care of it, and it's a million times more radioactive than the low-level waste. It sits out there like it's at the end of a bowling alley, susceptible, maybe in some cases, maybe not at Pilgrim, to flooding, certainly terrorists, certainly drones that will be developed by unfriendly states and terrorists and so on and so forth. And these things are extremely vulnerable. And that's one of the reasons on emergency planning where I have a major difficulty. These things are going to break. They are going to spread radiation. They are going to spread radiation out beyond 10 miles. And I believe strongly radiation monitoring and emergency planning needs to be in place as it is right now. And how far out it goes, whether it's 5 miles, 10 miles, something that's going to be negotiated is certainly not going to be anything based on any technical input other than you need emergency planning. Now here's the NRC's mission statement, which is very fuzzy. I apologize, but it is very appropriate that their NRC's mission, as stated on their website, is to protect the people and the environment. Now, I've dealt a lot with the NRC over many, many years. I've dealt with a lot of media people, a lot of technical people, an awful lot of members of the public, and they don't believe quite that the NRC is performing their mission of protecting the people and the environment. What most people see, including myself and many of the people I work with, is an absolute contempt for the public. They ignore public input through various legal means, or just totally ignore it, or restate your concern and give it back to you. And again, this is my, believe it or not, unbiased opinion. Safety is not a priority. They are there to ensure the continuing economic viability of the nuclear industry, and it's the NRC's principal priority. They have an incestuous relationship with the Nuclear Energy Institute, which is essentially their lobbying group for the nuclear industry, and with the nuclear industry itself, whether it be vendors such as Holtec or utilities or any of the other major vendors, be it combustion engineering, General Electric, all your manufacturers. There's a very, very tight relationship between the NRC and these organizations, meetings that are held. Half the regulations and guidance the Nuclear Energy Institute actually writes for the NRC to assure that no damage is done to their utilities, and then the NRC adopts the Nuclear Energy Institute's position, and pretty much a total disregard of the environment. That's the other part of protecting the public. Some of the shortcomings, let me try to get this so I can read it here. Top one is a very important thing. You know, the NRC claims we protect the public by enforcing our regulations. The NRC is not able to identify which regulations are applicable to Pilgrim. We just don't know. We don't know if it's 10 CFR Part 50, Part 20, Part 71, Part 72, Part 100, and so on and so forth. So at California, we have filed a Freedom of Information Act request to have the NRC identify those regulations that are applicable. Now, where they're defined, they're clearly defined what regulations are applicable, and they're defined in 10 CFR 54.3. It's a definition of current licensing basis. We're trying to get it. Nobody knows, including the NRC inspectors who are on sites, which regulations are applicable. Okay.
Mr.
Sorry about
Chair, is this presentation on dry cask storage, or are we going to get to dry cask storage? Thank you.
Yeah. Dry casks are part of the regulations. Retaliates typically against dissenters, myself personally being one. They lose FOIA information. I got a response to FOIA. Well, we had that document, but we lost the CD. Refuses to take any meaningful enforcement action. For instance, at San Onofre, when they almost dropped a cask into the hole 23 feet, they gave them a big fine of $116,000. That's not very much. They misrepresent the existence of a safety analysis for the dry cask, and that can be easily found. I have a FOIA request into that. Where's the safety analysis for the flooding? That's the bottom bullet. This is an overview of the Pilgrim multi-purpose cask. On the right is a pictorial of the cask showing about 30 inches of concrete on the outside. And then inside of that is what they call the multi-purpose canister. Inside of that are, let's see how many, 68 fuel assemblies. In each canister, a fuel assembly has hundreds of individual rods in it. Now, the cooling for the Pilgrim cask, the colder air comes in the bottom, is naturally convected along the sides of the multi-purpose canister, and then exits out the top. And we don't even know what the temperature difference is between the inlet air and the outlet air. I haven't been able to find that. But the amount of heat removed is shown in the, Yeah, just some numbers here. These are again from Holtec's documents. There's radiation levels on the outside of the cask are in excess of 1 million rads per hour. To put that in perspective, 1,000 rads per hour will pretty close to instantly kill a person. And, you know, there's 5 orders of magnitude greater, but people won't be exposed to that because on the outside of that, we have 20 inches of concrete, and it brings the radiation level down to something that at least you can approach it. But the fuel inside there is generating constantly a heat of about 125,000 BTUs per hour. Put that in perspective, an average home probably in this area, like if it's anything like my house, which is a fairly large house, has a boiler of about 130,000 BTU. So it's a significant amount of heat. The fuel temperature can be as high as 1,058 degrees. And what most people that don't know is that this fuel that's inside here is pressurized internally to about 750 pounds of helium. The shell temperature, the shell is what they call the MPC, totally isolated from the environment and welded shut. Its outside temperature can be as high as 775 degrees. And the pressure inside is helium, and they do a fairly good job of evacuating the canister of all air and hopefully water, and then they pressurize it somewhere between 30 to 45, maybe more. They don't give out that number. We don't know how much pressure is in. You know, the total heat energy that's this thing here, again, probably not that meaningful to too many people, is in excess of 10 million BTUs. That's a lot of heat, what I call latent heat. Holtec calls it, they got another term for it, it's not right, momentum heat or something like that. Each cask contains a lot of energy within it. And the problem is Holtec has said, well, we got 1,600 casks out there and we've never had a failure. What I'd love to see and address Holtec directly, and I know Holtec doesn't have people that are technical people here, is how would one know if a cask fails? Now, a cask can fail from corrosion, it can fail from heating up, from loss of cooling, from overpressure, from liquid water being in the bottom. None of these failures will ever be detected. Now,
Mr. Blanch, if I might ask, what are you considering a failure? That inner canister that holds the fuel?
I'm considering a failure a degradation of, see how steady I am, this canister right here that contains all the radioactive material.
The outer canister?
No, the inner canister right
canister.
here. I'm not very steady, I am. No, that's what I consider a failure, is a degradation, corrosion, overpressure, any type of degradation. And as a control system engineer, and knowing the codes, both the Instrument Society of America codes and the ASME, American Society for Mechanical Engineers, requires any pressurized tank containing hazardous material to have relief valves. There is no assurance, and it's a total violation of common sense, engineering principles, and everything else, to not have a relief valve on a pressurized tank that's got an input of 125,000 BTUs per hour going into it. It's just incredible, it's unsafe, and I wouldn't want to be anywhere near that. And that's how Holtec can claim out of the 1,600 canisters, we've never seen a failure. Well, if your head's in the sand, you're not going to see very much. No one can see this. This happens to be just a cut and paste. It's the number of curies in that are in a typical boiling water reactor cask, and it talks about cesium, plutonium-239, and americium, and a whole bunch of others. I just put it in there in case anyone asks how many and what materials there, so I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time. My position has changed considerably in this last 6 months. I was always in sync with all the critics that were out there, get this stuff out of the spent fuel pool, because all the studies from the NRC studies to the Bob Alvarez studies and UCS studies says the danger of a spent fuel pool fire are so significant, we've got to get all this spent fuel out of the pools and into dry cask. And I was under the very, very naive assumption, like when I was working up at Maine Yankee and we were putting this in the dry cask, that, hey, they're passive devices, natural convection cooling. What could possibly go wrong? Until I started my research last August. And since I've not completed, but continued to do my study on the California Holtec, that I've come to the conclusion that the Holtec dry cask present a major risk to the public. Terrorism is just totally rejected. These are, if I were a terrorist and I really wanted to do harm, I know where I'd go. It would be to one of these ISFSI facilities in a high population zone. It does not take much. I've flown over 1,500 feet over Indian Point. There's no protection. But in general, from what I've seen, that dry cask storage, while not safe, is not safe. It is safer than leaving 3,000 spent fuel elements in the spent fuel pool, except for Holtec casks. I believe that the engineering of the Holtec cask, and I can give a lot of specific examples, is totally inadequate. Some of the deficiencies I've just mentioned about the monitoring, lack of relief valves. There are statements being made by Holtec CEO. This is one of his statements that he made August sometime of 2018. Finally, how about fixing a crack in the MPC wall? That's the wall that contains all the fuel. I've stated that although it may be theoretically possible to repair a leak or crack in a canister, in my opinion, it is not practical when one considers efficiency and radiation dose. What he's really saying here, and he's said it many other times, if these things fail, we cannot repair them. We cannot take them out. We cannot remove them. We can't use the Russian doll concept. He's basically saying, I'm going to take your money. I'm going to leave you with a whole bunch of dry cask. Good luck. Just amazing statements he's making here. Okay, what are the risks? Cask will fail prior to any symptoms. Failure mechanisms I gave to you. There's potential for major radioactive releases. They absolutely cannot be repaired. Cask failures will impact residents. I know not owned, operated by the licensee, but there is a radiation monitoring system in the surrounding the Pilgrim Point. That may be your first means of detection of a cask failure. They don't have any radiation monitors on these casks, which they should have. And if you look at Fukushima, You look at Chernobyl, you could have significant releases because each one of these casks contains more cesium-137 and other isotopes than was released from Chernobyl. And I am not saying that it's all going to be released. You know, a small percentage will be released, but it's very likely to cause the land to be uninhabitable for generation. And the last question.
Mr. Blanch,
Yes.
if I may, I don't think that's quite fair to the public to have this analogy to Fukushima and 6 power reactors, 4 of which were operating at full power with fresh decay heat loads, as opposed to spent fuel, just as you have at your millstone plants, okay? Just as was at Connecticut Yankee, okay? Spent fuel is normally only subdued, kept underwater. That's the only barrier in the spent fuel pool. And now what we're talking about is putting it into dry casks after a period of 3 years of decay,
Or more,
okay? Or more,
right?
yeah. Because Mr. Blanch, I think it's only fair to say, I mean, I knew you back in the 1980s. You perhaps don't recall, but you were a brilliant instrumentation engineer. You knew your Yahwehs, your reactor protection systems, your primary contaminant. So I have all the respect for your opinion.
Okay.
But-
Fair statement, but I'd
Yeah.
like to respond.
Please.
Again, I said I shouldn't be comparing it with the doses and radiation amounts at Chernobyl and Fukushima. I'm sorry. The most damaging isotope is cesium-137, which is all that's left right now. The iodine-131 is gone from Chernobyl and also from Fukushima. And the total contamination causing the permanent evacuation is cesium-137 and bits and pieces of plutonium and uranium that are lying around. These are the same isotopes in the casks that are at Pilgrim. Percentage of release, no one's done any analysis. We don't know. I think it's a good analogy. I welcome differing opinions at any time. You heard my opinion. I'm sorry. What's your name?
Smith, Paul.
Paul Smith.
Yes, sir.
You've heard his opinion. I welcome, different opinions, and we can sit down and discuss them at any time, at length. The biggest risk is Holtec and the NRC's negligence, and I say Holtec on the behalf of not monitoring these things. Single failure can release. They have nothing there, no means to repair it. And the NRC's negligence is, you've all seen results of it in some of your dealings with the NRC. I mean, you wouldn't even have the courtesy of sending someone tonight to listen here, and I let them know a week ago, and the chairman has let them know. It wasn't a scheduling thing, they just didn't want to be here. I would love to sit down and have a dialogue with the NRC and talk about their things. I mean, just the issue on, well, Mr. NRC, what are your regulations that are applicable to the Pilgrim nuclear plant? Just start off there. Anyway, again, major issues, the cascade failures are not ever detectable or repairable. Fuel degradation, those little pencil-thin rods that, if they're high burn-up zirconium, which some of them are Pilgrim, those are more likely to fail, won't be detected. You could have extremely high radiation inside there, and no one's going to know. Corrosion cannot be detected. All the canisters at San Onofre have been inserted, and they've been scratched by carbon steel, which is the initiator for some type of chloride stress corrosion. Can't inspect them, they're degrading. Again, getting back to terrorism, already cover that. Again, big shortcoming, no identified means to ever remove the spent fuel from Plymouth. And then they have it's new reg 2214 on, okay, we said they're good for 25 years, but if we implement an aging management program that is in this new reg 2214, if we comply with the requirements of that aging management program, we could probably get them out to 50 years and justify it. I said, oh, that's great. So I went into the aging management program. And I think maybe you can get it on the web if you just type in that new reg. Look at the aging management program. It talks about, well, if we have an opportunistic event that allows us to go in and we'll look at it and we'll look at, you know, we'll do a visual inspection of the surface of the can. To me, what it's really saying is, if it fails, and if we detect it, we'll have an opportunity to go in and look and see what failed. There is nothing in there, like other components that are not so radioactive. We can go up, we can ultrasonically test them and make sure their integrity is still there and they're not not wearing out. The aging management with the dry cask is an example of how Holtec and the NRC have apparently worked together and convinced the NRC to accept an opportunistic repair program for the purpose of aging management, which is absolutely, totally useless. So getting back to major issues, that nuclear waste disposal has been studied for more than 50 years. Back in the late 40s, we started on this, and billions of dollars have been spent. We've looked at Yucca Mountain, we've looked at vitrification, we've looked at neutralizing isotopes, we've done everything out of Battelle and Idaho National Lab, and we spent billions of dollars on Yucca Mountain, burying this thing down under a deep, dry desert for 250,000 years. Not technically acceptable. So what do? We put it in your backyard, say, boy, that's a great place for it. It's just unconscionable to me that we can take this stuff that is so bad and just leave it here and don't inspect it and say, good luck, Pilgrim, we're going bye-bye. Largest risk was the NRC's failure to regulate and deficient design. NRC says it's okay to keep it there indefinitely. Unavoidable fact is spent nuclear fuel will be dangerous for thousands of years and will likely never be removed from Pilgrim. Major issues, as I see them, and this panel should see them, are where's the financial reliability? Certainly this panel should be asking the NRC to identify the applicable regulations. That can be done easily with a FOIA request, or I could do it for you. The NRC, like every other agency, federal agency, be it the DEA, FAA, is a captive regulator. Safety analysis is required by the standard review plan. Safety analysis, I've got one example where they're saying, well, overpressure can't happen, so we don't need pressure monitoring and relief valves. It's just incredible that they say in a safety analysis, well, that can never happen here. The NRC needs the nuclear industry to survive. The plans for Pilgrim and San Onofre, the pool, the only system capable of hopefully being able to facilitate the repair of these canisters, will be demolished. Now, I think the panel's got to have some input in this. You want it forever, that's your decision. You want a slight chance of recovery should something occur, demand that spent fuel pool stays there, because there's nothing anywhere in the world that's available to ever repair or inspect a spent fuel pool canister. And the obvious question, why doesn't Holtec NRC want monitoring as required by the regulations? It is absolutely required by the regulations. Why don't they monitor it? Because I don't want to see what's going on inside there, and because I don't have any way to repair these things, I just don't want to monitor it. That's bad. Holtec's engineering, I can not monitor corrosion, no accident analyses, potentially explosive with zircaloid cladding, high burn-up fuel, no aging management under that new reg 2214, susceptible to undetected fuel and cask degradation, no inspections required for aging management, no relief valves. That's a huge thing. You know, I've got a car, we all have cars out there, that have hundreds of sensors on them, and they all feed into your dashboard, and the light comes on, and it says system trouble, and you can have a few buttons. That's a simple car. Would you buy a car that had no sensors on it, never told you that your carburetor was bad, your seatbelts aren't working, your airbags aren't working, your engine's overheating, your battery voltage is low? No, you wouldn't. Why should we do that with the most toxic substance on earth? No monitoring whatsoever. Here and at Southern Cal, there's going to be water accumulating at the bottom of those canisters. There's no sensors there. If we can ever agree upon site removal from the site, those canisters have to be inspected before they're going to be allowed by the Department of Transportation to go over the roads. Can't do it. Holtec says there's never been a cask failure. Yeah, Holtec, Mary Lampert sent me something the other day on a new cask design. Am I correct, Mary? Double wall cask design. That was interesting. I don't know how many people of it have seen it, but what I read into that, they have drawings and everything they've given to the NRC that show a double-walled cask. And they're saying, well, we might need these to extend the life. In other words, they're almost admitting they have deficient cask out there with short lives. So they've come up with a new cask design. I didn't bring a picture of it, but it's out there.
Well, can I interrupt for a minute?
Sure.
I want to keep it on schedule for you people.
Yeah, okay.
Are there any of the slides that you absolutely want to hit?
I'm sorry?
Are there any of the slides that you absolutely want to hit from?
Yeah, these are examples. What are the safety incentives? These are the questions that I think this panel needs to look at very, very carefully. And I'm sorry about the run over in time. You've got to establish a dialogue with your people at the NRC and at Holtec. You've got to get them up here and have that dialogue. I think that's probably the most important thing. Recommendations to the NCAP. Again, you will have you have copies of these, and an overall summary, and then just as a submariner, I always felt safe. As I mentioned at the beginning, I would not feel safe having my grandchildren living next to this facility. And thank you for your time, and that's why I do it, for my little grandkids. So thank you very
Paul.
much for your time.
I should note that Paul, because as you all know, we have no budget. Paul came under his own expense and effort to share his opinions with us. They are obviously Paul's opinion. And the first thing, before opening it up to questions from the panel, I have a few of my own. But before doing that, Pat, do you want to respond to any of it?
No.
Okay. That being said, does anybody have questions, or I'll?
Yes.
Okay, Pine, you can go first.
You keep referring to the NRC as not inspecting it, but doesn't DOE have responsibility for inspecting canisters and that sort of thing? Are there regulations within the Department of Energy that would
I
supplant
think
the NRC
Mary might be
regulations?
able to help me out better on that, but right now, Mary, correct me if I'm wrong, NRC has total responsibility for the fuel, is that correct? While it's on site, so DOE is not involved in it. I think that's a political area. Someone wanted DOE, who promised to take possession in 1998 of the fuel. They didn't, they reneged on that. So the NRC has got the fuel.
That's why I'm asking the question, and also because the DOE pays out money to the companies to cover some of these expenses. So the question I have is, are there any regulations within the DOE, or maybe we can find out, Sean, that would help us
I wouldn't even,
tackle, shall
I
I
wouldn't
say, the
even try to
NRC?
comment
Okay.
on it. I
All
won't
right, thank
comment
you.
on something I don't know anything about.
Any other questions? I know you had, Joe. I'm sorry, I kept looking left. We'll get to you next. Joe, go ahead.
I have a question, comment.
Sure.
Others have questions?
Okay.
First, I want to thank Mr. Blanch for being here as a 30-year nuclear professional. The industry owes a huge debt of gratitude to you for the safety issues that you identified with water level notching. That was instrumental to the safety of the industry, and very much appreciate that. Just a couple of questions. You gave your background in electrical engineering and control systems.
Correct.
Have your concerns been evaluated or endorsed by a civil engineer, metallurgists? others
Metallurgy
with,
is not mine,
higher
but
specialty?
my concerns and have been, as you very well know, the Rosemont transmitters. This is instrumentation monitoring. That was validated by the NRC, by the industry, by the Electric Power Research Institute. My second issue was the physical piping layout of the vital instruments for water level at Pilgrim and every other BWR. That was validated by EPRI. It was Newmark at the time, by the NRC, complete validation. I've been working on the 42-inch gas line at Indian Point. That's been validated that does present a risk to the Indian Point plant. However, nothing has been done about it. The NRC says pipelines off the site are not our problem. So it's kind of hard to say I've won. The best thing I can say is I've made nuclear power safer. That's about all. That's about all I can say.
And I agree with that. But the same as those other organizations validated those concerns that you had previously raised.
Every one of them.
Have similar substantiations happened with these claims from individuals that have specialties in these areas, like metallurgists and civil engineers?
There's some studies out there. Again, I won't go near chemistry or metallurgy, but yeah, I could get you reference to the potential of explosive fuel and zirconium hydriding and things like that. I've actually got NRC documents as reference. I mean,
Thanks.
these are not things being pulled out of the air.
No,
by any
that'd be
means.
helpful, thank
Yeah.
you. As far as the aging management program goes, isn't it true that the High Storm 100 system needs to have full aging management established prior to its relicensing?
Well, that's what the regulations say,
2022?
yes. But if you look at that new Reg 2214, you look at the proposed aging management system for the Holtec cask, and it's meaningless. If you look at it from an engineering perspective, it does nothing. Now, if I were, getting a license for my car that was 25 years old, I think a regulatory agency would say, okay, you got to check the tires, you got to check the brakes, you got to check the airbags, the seat belts, and anything else that's related to safety, or that could do you some personal harm or possibly do other drivers personal harm. I would expect the regulatory agency to demand that be inspected. Does the aging management program require any of that? The very clear answer is no. We will fix it when the flat tire occurs or my airbag doesn't work. I will fix it then.
We haven't seen the aging management program for the Holtec
You
100
look-
designs. It will
You
not-
look, you look at that new reg, it's right in there, and what the NRC expects from you. It's,
But the program itself has not been approved by the NRC. It's not been
no,
submitted to the
but
NRC.
it's going to be based on that new reg, which is going to be the acceptance criteria. So they write the acceptance criteria, which is their expectations, and Holtec, your company, writes the aging management program.
Right.
Yeah.
And submits it to the NRC for approval, absolutely.
That's right.
And one last thing, just with respect to radiation or monitoring of the casks.
Yes.
The casks are, in fact, surveilled for radiation on a monthly basis.
On a monthly basis,
Yes.
okay, so,
I just want to make sure that.
okay, someone goes
every-
around with a GM tube and.
Yes, and
Yeah.
precisely identifies the radiation
Yeah,
level
well,
and the output of the
that's-
cask.
That's
and
monthly.
Compares it to previous
To
readings.
detect failures, I think it should be done continuously.
Thank you.
Richard?
Yeah, Paul, thanks for coming, and could you, I have a few questions and comments. Can you just flip back to the slide that you're talking about spent fuel pools versus dry cask, and take,
Ah,
there's a couple slides back.
okay.
While you're looking, my stomping grounds were in West Hartford in the 1950s and 1960s. I don't know if you were.
What's that?
I lived in West Hartford in the 50s and 60s.
I
That's
lived
where
there in
grew
the
up. So I
60s.
don't know if you were there then, maybe our paths crossed.
I was there from 1965.
Small world.
Anyway, what slide did
There
you
was,
want?
I guess, at the top bullet talked about maybe reconsidering spent fuel pools.
Oh.
And then, I think it was,
Oh, that one, I think.
you're right. I guess the second to last bullet, dry cask storage is safer except for Holtec casks. Are there other vendors nationwide or worldwide that you would consider
Yeah,
their cast designs superior to
I'm not
Holtec's for
saying
certain
they're-
reasons?
Well, first of all, no one can define what safe is, but I think there is a design that's being used in Germany that is safer. This design is, instead of the 5/8 or half-inch thick canisters, they're 10, 12 inches thick, made of steel. They're not going to corrode, they're not going to break. And they're put inside of a facility that is built of reinforced concrete, seismic, terrorist, I don't say terrorist-proof, but certainly a terrorist deterrent. Yes, there are much better designs, but you know what, how decisions are made. That design's not cheap. You know, Holtec's gotten approval from the NRC. Hey, we got a product that's been, authorized by the NRC. You want to buy it? No one else has it, and it's cheap. So,
Two other questions. Since there's always going to be risks associated with spent fuel pool storage and dry cask storage, as you're pointing out, but I'm curious of your opinion in terms of taking spent nuclear fuel and reburning it in modern, newfangled reactors. That could be a whole discussion for a meeting, but
Yeah.
just in a nutshell, do you feel that could be, given
You
the
know, I
potential
think-
risks and safety concerns?
I'm
is
not
that-
optimistic. A lot of people, a whole lot brighter than me, are trying to look at that out at INEL and out at Hanford and Battelle. Those are the scientists. I'm an engineer. I shouldn't even offer an opinion, but it's a long way off.
And lastly, I spent a good part of my career as a environmental consultant, helping to design air quality and meteorological programs for nuclear and
Okay.
other facilities. And I feel that one of the recommendations we've had in our annual reports submitted to the governor's office the last 2 years was for the need for both on-site and off-site radiological and meteorological monitoring during decommissioning and even, till the spent fuel gets out of the pool in particular. And there's no reason why there couldn't be continuous emission monitoring. It'd be expensive, but it can be done.
Yeah, no, it can be done, and, I used to sit on the Standards Committee for radiation monitoring for both area and process monitoring, and I'm very, very familiar with radiation monitoring. And I think that, some type of, it's really the particulates that are gonna get to you that are gonna be harmful. The cesiums, the plutoniums, uraniums, americium.
My feeling is that unless there was a problem with the overpack itself cracking or something happening, I think Patrick, in his presentation, is going to be talking about some tests that have been done to show the durability of the overpack in
There you
particular.
go.
But if there was an MPC leak in the canister there, the only way the radionuclides are gonna get out would be through the portholes, and you could be monitoring in different ways continuously, either right there or at the perimeter with a fence line type of a program too.
There's different ways. I mean, we're not gonna try to engineer it here. There's a lot of ways it could be done. You could have continuous monitoring. You could have one monitor that cycles and, samples
Yeah.
events. So you could have continuous monitoring on all of them, but I'm not going to try to engineer it other than once a month of checking radiation levels with a GM tube for not looking for particulates is not adequate. Yeah, this is the type of statement I was trying to get to, and I ran over. There's no requirement for detection of off-normal pressure, and therefore no monitoring is required. Who would make an arrogant statement like that? There is a requirement for detection of off-normal pressure as an ASME requirement. Therefore, we're not putting it in. I mean, that statement is going to tick off any reasonable person, I think, when you make an arrogant statement like that. And that's right out of the FSAR right there.
Any other questions?
Yes.
Yeah, let me go to Joe first. Joe?
When the questions are over,
Okay.
then I'm going to make my
Question?
comment.
I think it's important for this panel and then the audience to just be really clear on what you're saying. So on this, on the dry cask storage, the question was, are there other models you've seen? And you started by saying, who can say what's safe and not safe?
Right.
But so can you expand on that? And then I think specifically, are you saying that dry cask storage anywhere in the United States? Or what's different about what is proposed to be built here?
What is different about the Holtec cask is the thin wall canister sitting out there in the open, susceptible to anyone who wants to do damage with very little security and no emergency planning to protect it. In my mind, that's not safe. Safety is in the eye of the beholder. I think, in my mind, again, the German design, the Swiss design that they're using that's inside of a building to protect it is acceptably safe for me. It might not be for you. Maybe you'd say, that's no good, or that's...
No, I mean, you're the expert, but I guess compared to, could you compare it to Vermont Yankee or?
Vermont Yankees got exactly the same situation you people are doing, exactly the same. You're not unique. Indian Point's going to have it. I'm working with people at Indian Point. Oyster Creek's going to have it, and it's a horrible situation we got ourselves into.
Paul?
Yeah.
Yes, with, Mr. Blanch, with all respect, so after 5 years, certainly within 25 years, any cesium or ruthenium, and there will be some still in the individual fuel rods.
Mm-hmm.
But I agree with you, it will be in its solid form. It won't be volatile at that point. It won't be gas, it won't be liquid.
No.
So should the fuel cladding develop a crack, and then, okay, the outer exterior, okay, of the canister develop a crack, we're talking about all that this, and this is not to denigrate or to cowboy the idea, but all it has to do is remain in its passive, maintaining the geometry, okay? And there is no escape of
If
radionuclides.
it maintains the geometry, and you don't have fuel failures due to the high burnup fuel, or some of the studies that have been done that I could
Yeah.
reference you to about zirconium hydriding and whatever that is, I don't even know. If it remains in its geometry, the release isn't gonna be big. I mean, what's gonna be in there's gonna be a little bit of gas. If, you know, some of the fuel vents do degrade, they're gonna contribute to the gas that's in there. That gas is gonna come out. Maybe it'll be harmful, maybe it won't. That's why you need to monitor these things to determine whether it's harmful.
Right.
I'm
And-
not saying it's absolutely going to.
And as an instrument engineer myself, I agree with constant monitoring. I like
Okay.
that, okay? But you should be also aware, besides the health physicists and their monthly surveillances, our operators tour, okay, the ISFSI pad on a shiftly basis, at least once a day, without exception, okay? Every cast is visually inspected, and the operator himself, you know, observes the status and condition of it. So,
How does it, of the FSC?
yes, yeah.
What's he do?
Our ISFSI at this
I've looked at the
time,
tech specs and it doesn't say that.
yeah, but it is on the operator tour. And that,
So
as
what-
we
what-
do every room in the building.
And what's he gonna do when he goes out to the FSC?
What he does is he visually inspects the exterior of the cast, okay?
Yeah.
The bottom of the cast, he looks at the air ducts, that they're clear, top and bottom. There's no liquid, there's no degradation, no
No
damage.
no leaves, no snow, nothing, but if you look at the tech specs in the FSAR, you'll see it's not a daily.
It's not required, that's correct.
That's right.
All right, lacking any other, I got a few quick questions, and then Joe will ask for your comment at the end. It felt to me, from your opinions, Mr. Blanchard, we appreciate you coming tonight, that there were 4 things that I wanted to make sure I clarified, and they're in the major issues. One is your statement, your opinion that canister gas failures are not detectable. Is there any difference of opinion about that?
Are there any differences of opinion? No. In fact,
So that's a definitive
some
statement?
of Mr. Singh's statements,
Okay.
we have video of them. He essentially admits, I gave you one example,
Yeah.
he's admitted to it before.
Are there any differences of opinion among others that the failures are not repairable?
I'm sorry?
Are there any other opinions, other than yours, that you stated here that the Casks failures are not repairable?
Again, Mr. Singh said that himself. My friend, NRC Senior Resident Inspector at one of the plants, says essentially the same thing, are not repairable. These things are 1 million rads per hour
Yeah.
without shielding on the outside.
And on the fuel degradation, you said that they can't be detected. Is
That's
that-
correct.
Is that open to any dispute?
I don't think so.
Okay. And finally, on the MPC corrosion, you said that that can't be detected.
The what?
The MPC corrosion on the inside shell, can that be detected?
It can be detected in certain, they put a camera down inside the holes at San Onofre, and they're able to, you know, get a small quadrant because there's seismic standoff, so they can't, you know, do a total inspection by any means, and certainly they can't do anything at the bottom.
MIC corrosion, MIC, that you're talking about? I'm not familiar with MIC.
No, I think it's primarily the chloride stress corrosion. No, MIC is, there's a microbiological corrosion, yeah. that's
And
found
and
out.
then the last one, the last question I have, if you could, before Mr. Coughlin. You know, we live in one of the most pristine places in the world. And we were fortunate that Entergy made the sound decision to move the cast further away. But what would happen? What would happen if a little water, say, a couple of inches rolled up underneath there, that despite the on-shift checks for leaves and other things, what would happen inside when the water hits 750-degree temperatures?
You know, where, if you look at where the inlet vents are, they're very close to the ground. You'd have to have quite a bit of water coming in there. It would most likely flash to steam because inside the canister. And my own personal experience is I don't think there'd be any catastrophic failure from water coming in there from, you know, a short-term flood. Long-term flood is different, or a very, very high flood. But what you've got here, I don't see a major concern like I do out in California that we discussed.
Didn't that happen
Joe?
in Fukushima?
What happened?
Water got in.
Tsunami came in and knocked the canisters over?
Yeah.
No, I don't think there was any.
They were moving canisters, they had to reset.
Some moved.
Joe?
Thank you,
No
Mr.
water
Blanche,
got
for your, thank you, Mr. Blanche, for your coming on your own dime and sharing your views and concerns with the panel and the audience. Much, however, if not most of what you've said, at least I, and I suspect the rest of the panel would agree that we've heard before from a multitude of other sources similar concerns. It seems to me that all of these kinds of concerns boil down into three areas. First, if the licensee, the decommissioning licensee at this point, is not complying with the requirements of the NRC in the decommissioning process to the letter, then it's the NRC's responsibility to take appropriate action against the licensee. If they don't, meaning the NRC doesn't, then it's up to their congressional oversight committees to do that. Whether they will or not is a separate issue.
Right.
Second, if the concerns about the NRC's rules and regulations that apply to the decommissioning licensees are inadequate, are inappropriate, from a scientific, from a technical, from a safety, environmental standpoint, whatever the concerns are. If those requirements are inadequate or inappropriate, then that becomes a political issue. That is up to the congressional oversight committees to take
I never said
responsible
that.
action.
I never said they were inadequate.
Third, that if in fact the process, if you will, of storing the dry casks or the spent fuel, if you will, not just at Pilgrim, but across the country, is inadequate, is unsafe, that's the Department of Energy's responsibility, and we all know, and we've discussed ad infinitum, their failure to enforce their own responsibilities under the law. What that, however, means that that's the responsibility also of their congressional oversight committees. That, and they've done little to nothing about it. That then brings us back in sort of a loop to say, well, okay, if there are all of these problems and concerns and they aren't being addressed according to whether it's the scientists, the engineers, the public, what have you, if they're not being adequately addressed by our existing system, that's the Congress's fault because it starts with the Congress. Then that raises the question, not for you, but for everyone, then what are the congressional delegations from each state that have the responsibility to look at these kinds of things where they have nuclear facilities that are under federal jurisdiction? Where are they all? We've discussed in the past from both our own members and people who have come in to speak to us that probably, and my numbers are probably a little off, but probably at least half the members of Congress and half or more of the members of the Senate and half or more of the members of the House of Representatives come from areas that have nuclear facilities that are under the jurisdiction of the NRC and then ultimately the DOE if they ever come up with a solution for permanent storage. Where are these congressional delegations for coming back and responding to the public's concern about the inadequacy of either enforcement, existing standards, or all of the above. All as we ever hear from our congressional delegations is at public meetings when the NRC is here, we get nice sounding letters that are read by their staff. There's no follow-up that occurs afterwards. What the congressional delegations ought to be doing to address all of these concerns, assuming most of them, if not all of them, are valid, is getting together down in Washington and saying, okay, if more than half of the members of the Senate and more than half the members of the House represent states in areas where the same concerns and or risks exist, then they ought to get together and form a nuclear committee to address all these issues to the other members of Congress, and there sure and heck are enough members in the House and Senate to convince their other colleagues to say, we've got a problem, it's not a Pilgrim problem, it's a national problem. And what we've got to do is something about it, not talk about it, take some action. Yes, it's going to be political, it's going to be controversial, but that's what they get paid for, and that's what they are elected to do, and they haven't done it. So all of the different groups of concern, whether it's our colleagues here in the audience or their friends around the country, your colleagues with the concerned scientists and so forth and so on, all of these have to be looked at and gotten together and say, this is a political issue. Unless the politics are solved, the technical aspects are never going to get solved. And if they do get together, I can guarantee you, because I spent 40 years in Washington, I know how the system is supposed to work and how it does work, which is not how it's supposed to work, that if they get together as a group and really push these concerns, they will be able to successfully convince their other colleagues in the House and Senate of that the concerns are legitimate and they need to take appropriate action. That's what needs to be done. These discussions are very nice, but they're never going to solve anything.
Thank you, Mr. Coughlin.
You're elected to go down to Washington and convince them.
Thank you. Thank you very
I
much, Mr.
understand your
Blanch. Thank you. Mr. O'Brien. Joe, while Pat's setting up, what is it that you had for dinner this evening?
I didn't even have anything to drink. I need it.
I drove Joe here and I almost hit 3 cars. No, just kidding.
You want me to do slides for you?
I got it right here. I was going to do it from my seat, but since this is up here. So thank you, committee. Just wanted to provide an update on the ISFSI work. That work is still underway. We've had 3 separate pours completed safely and without incident. The NRC conducted an inspection of the final pour, which was about 80 truckloads worth of concrete, and that was completed satisfactorily. We're working on that approach apron to the pad, and we're beginning work on the spent fuel haul path. The project remains on schedule, and a couple pictures up there just for reference. So we've had some milestones along the way. We did pick a specialized contractor for reactor segmentation, GE Hitachi. Refuel floor preparations work is underway ahead of the reactor segmentation piece of the project. We delivered 15 high storm casks and multipurpose canisters to the site ahead of the spring loading campaign. We're on track to remove the old abandoned meteorological tower. By the spring, that's the tower that's down along the parking lot side of the property nearest to the entrance. CDI signed a letter with the National Labor Agreement with the Laborers Union of North America and the International Union of Operating Engineers. That'll be for augmented staffing as we need it over the project. And I'll have a different slide on staffing in a minute. And the site characterization contract is awaiting final approval, and we've selected our preferred bidder and working through that process.
Hey, Pat?
Yes,
So you still have an existing primary Met tower,
we have 2.
correct?
So this, yeah.
That is a disused,
This is the one that, we built a new one.
It's abandoned.
2015 timeframe, 16 timeframe. This was the one, the backup one we replaced. So there are two still operational on site.
I think there was a problem several years ago with the backup tower, and that's why there was the project,
Correct.
that's why the second backup
Yep,
was.
no, absolutely, and we had made the commitment to the
put
town
there.
to pull it down in a certain amount of time related
Just
to.
want to understand, any plans in terms of an end date for the primary and secondary tower? Because we talked to the NRC about this 2 years ago, and from a regulatory standpoint, they didn't really provide us specific answer.
I don't
to
have that offhand. I'll look into it for you. I'll see if I can
I'd
get that
like-
question
yeah,
answered for
now
you.
that we're further along.
Yeah,
Thank
no,
you.
absolutely, I appreciate that.
Okay.
So just, we were talking a lot about emergency planning. We have finalized agreements with Duxbury, Bridgewater, Carver, Braintree, Taunton, and Plymouth. I actually finalized with Kingston earlier this week as well. All the agreements require, allow for the 3 months of required funding, plus this additional program unwinding costs that we work through with each of the communities and worked with them to agree upon. Some of the communities that you would probably consider as mutual aid responders in an event something happens with Plymouth, there's some language in there related to them during the decommissioning period. If something were to occur to a piece of their equipment, we would be responsible for that as well. So tried to work with them to give them reasonable assurance, and we'll be before, oh man, I wrote it as Board of Selectmen, Ken, I can't get out of the habit. We'll be before the Select Board next Tuesday night to provide an update as well. So I think one of the most important pieces, you know, for the community is the questions are always on staffing and how's the workforce. We continue to maintain our 4 fully staffed emergency plan teams. Our current head count's at 253 employees, and our next workforce reduction is scheduled for on or about April 1st. That'll bring down to about 180 people. That'll be a relatively static number for the project. There'll be staffing along the way for special projects where we would bring in augmented staff as needed. We're working with the Department of Career Services on transition for those employees, and the past 2 days, we had some unemployment informational sessions and resume writing and interview skills workshops. We'll continue to work with the state on those through the entirety. This is something we did when it was Entergy, very similar for the 2 years leading up to shutdown. And we're continuing to work with the Department of Labor, federal level, on the Trade Adjustment and Assistance Act to provide access to certain programs for displaced workers. And then I just have a little slide on dry casts. As of January 2020, we have 118 plants using Holtec storage and transport systems in 13 different countries. 1,365 systems have been loaded around the globe. The technology is mature and in use, safely storing and transporting used fuel around the globe. It's accepted around the globe, but roughly 25% of the worldwide nuclear plants use our systems. And technology has been vetted and accepted by not just the NRC, but 12 additional regulators in different countries. So with that.
Before I open it up to questions from the panel, Pat, could you just explain to both the panel and the public the guidance you gave me about future detailed project plans and what?
Yeah, so because of the November meeting where we provided a waterfall schedule that then was immediately put into litigation, I'll have some challenges in providing something similar. My goal is to take the major work streams that we showed on that waterfall, which was about 7 different work streams, and provide updates of those along the way.
Are you committing to that, or is that what you're working on?
Yeah, no, because those are the major work of decommissioning, so that's what I would be presenting as updates anyway.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Any questions of Pat this evening? Yes, Jack, we'll start with you.
Pat, one of the things that I'd like the whole panel to know, we talked at our subcommittee on site restoration this afternoon. Another important milestone, I know we're focusing on dry cask storage, but the site characterization plan will also be over the next, I'll say, 12-month time period, which will set the groundwork really for what the cleanup plan will look at. So I think we should work to get some commitments on updates of that site characterization as it progresses.
Absolutely, and I've said at past meetings, I'm committing to the best of my ability to get the site characterization study when it's completed, released to the panel.
That's an excellent suggestion.
Yeah.
Rich?
Patrick, over the last 2 or 3 months, I've been copied, as all the other people on the panel, on promotional literature from Holtec, just summarizing things taking place at other plants that Holtec's acquiring, and also the end of the year 2019 summary. And I just want to come back to Holtec's double wall canister design consideration that was discussed by came up during the Q&A, our last presenter. I believe, and my understanding is that this double wall canister wasn't just developed suddenly, it was developed a couple of years ago by Holtec, and in fact, from the information I was reading just the other week, is that it's being used over in Russia. So, and the other thing that was interesting is that Holtec is in the process during 2020 trying to get approval with the US NRC for these innovative Casks designs to be used in the United States. So it sounds like, if my understanding is correct, that the Russian dial has been created and it's being used in Russia, so that if there were to be a multi-purpose canister leak, that any radionuclides would get trapped between the inner metal canister and the outer, which touches it there. There's no gap, from what I understand, from what I read. So that being said, I'd be curious, maybe this is something you could check with the higher-ups in New Jersey at Holtec about, is this cast design specifically going to be used in the United States if it gets approved by the NRC? And if so, would Holtec have any intention to retrofit its, whatever an appropriate time frame might be, any of the canisters being used at nuclear plants, or to be used in the United States? It's not that the current cask, it's subject to debate on the adequacy or inadequacy, but there's always good, better, and best. And if this particular cask design that was built for Russia, maybe there's something about the plants or the type of fuel or whatever that it had to be developed there, but the fact of the matter, it exists. But if it could be used in this country, and more specifically at Pilgrim, then would there be a possibility of changing out those canisters that are already there, or over a shorter period of time with the newer designs, just from a better safety consideration? So this is something,
Yeah, I'll absolutely
it'd
take
be
that back and
interesting
ask the
to
question. Yeah.
find out from the regulatory standpoint and also the engineering.
Thank you. Are there any other questions of Pat before we move on? Yes, Senator.
Short political statement first. Given that we will probably be the generation that goes down in history as being the most irresponsible relative to future generations, in every regard, whether it be our national debt, whether it be our inability in Washington to do anything about opiate control or gun control or anything, when tens of thousands of people are dying. So, Joe, I would like to be optimistic about us doing something in Washington about this, but we're not doing anything in Washington about all the other things, and people are literally dying every day. That's my political statement. As a technical expert in aging infrastructure inspection, which I am, as the accountable executive at an airline, and we've had this discussion in here before, I would actually like to see the aging inspection and maintenance program for these canisters. You want to talk about generational irresponsibility. We've talked about the warranty of these cylinders being 15 years, 20 years. We're talking about an exposure, a vulnerability, a risk that is for thousands and thousands of years. And how irresponsible is it for us to approve a plan and oversee a process that has absolutely no guarantee relative to future generations? I mean, we're talking thousands of years. How about 50 years? I mean, so I would like to see, if it's at all possible, what the aging inspection and maintenance program is for these canisters. Period. Is that something?
No, that's something I'll look into. I don't know offhand, but I'll take that back.
It'll be issued by 2022
Yeah.
for the renewal of the licenses of the canisters.
And is,
Right now, it doesn't exist.
is the inference, are we supposed to believe that the life of the canister is, as this program is going to outline, is greater than the life of the material in them to do harm? I mean, are we actually storing this stuff in something that is going to contain it and be safe for the length of time that the stuff in it will be dangerous? Or
I don't
so
think it can be.
basically, what we're saying is, we're just kicking the can down the road, it's gonna be someone else's problem. And depending on how old we are, some of us will be dead well before it's a problem, but somebody else has to solve it. That's really what we're saying.
That makes me feel good. I got another kid on the way.
Well, I'm sorry, but I mean, this is, you know, this should scare the crap out of everybody in here.
And the members of the media, I hope you have a chance to talk to Joe and to the senator tonight.
Yeah,
at the end.
can I just add one thing that came across my
Sure.
desk today was, and it was actually Joe's dissertation that reminded me. The stranded legislation, I believe, has been reissued, refiled in Congress yesterday.
Yep.
And to Joe's point, not one member of the Massachusetts delegation co-signed it. So, just something to think about.
We're going to go to new business, as I previewed for you earlier.
Patrick.
Thank you, Pat, by the way. Mr. O'Reilly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I apologize for the late notice yesterday regarding the piece of town meeting legislation that was filed by the Plymouth Planning Department. I just received it earlier this week and did attend the Board of Selectmen's meeting on Tuesday and the Advisory and Finance Committee meeting last evening. I did not have time to call a meeting of the Government Affairs Subcommittee, so that's why I sent it to the entire panel. I just wanted to make the panel aware of this town meeting article. I think it's a well-done piece of legislation that really just tries to address some of the local issues that the neighborhoods will possibly be impacted by, such as noise and dust and vibration on the site, and also travel across town roads. I think, I don't know if Mr. Mullen made you aware, I think I may have in my email that it was supported unanimously by the Board of Selectmen and the Finance Committee, and I just wanted to present it to the board tonight for discussion, and if anybody was interested in making a motion to support it, though, based on our past experience, I doubt we'll ever get 11 votes for anything, including what time it is tonight, but I'd be willing to entertain that. Thank you.
I personally have had a chance to read it. I don't know if everybody else has. It's pretty common sense stuff at a local level. I personally would like to make a motion that the panel go on record supporting it so that both the select board and town meeting would be willing to understand that we, the Nuclear Decommission Citizens Advisory Panel, are in support of this as a group. So with that, I make that motion.
Point of order
Yes.
to the chair.
Discussion question.
Sure.
My comment on the legislation, and I sent it to Kevin, I don't know if he had a chance to look at it yet, but prior subcommittees, okay, had looked at the burden on the town of Plymouth with all the suggested transport and the trucks and we had recommended the use of the barge berth and barging to railheads or to the inland water route. And we would just like to know that this legislation does not preclude the preferred use, using the barge berth.
In answer to your question, Paul, I did get your email late this afternoon. It does not preclude it at all. All it does is sets up some permit requirements, very similar to what the town has done with the gravel removal bylaw in terms of truck transportation across town roads. Doesn't have anything to do with if Holtec decides they want to barge the material out, all the better. It's not going across town roads, so it wouldn't preclude that at all.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Mr.
Sean?
Rothstein.
Before we vote, I just had a question for David Johnston, since I know he's very familiar with the 310 CMR regulations, and my question is, 310 CMR 7.00 and all the subchapters, thou shalt not create a condition of air pollution, and the DEP considers air pollution, it's not just air quality, it can be noise, vibration, and the like there. And I'm just curious if the current state regulations are sufficient such that the town would not necessarily have to have a bylaw here unless the town wanted to have something more stringent than what the state would require if there was a violation of any of the existing state regulations that apply to demolition considerations.
Well, it's a good question. I have not had a chance to read the proposed town bylaw and digest it adequately to offer I think, an informed vote tonight, which was one of the things that I would have asked the chairman to discuss. So I think we would get a more informed vote if we delay the vote, firstly.
I'm not opposed to, but I need
But
to
to
know
get to
more
your
before I
point,
vote.
the air quality regulations can regulate dust, noise, and odors. I'm not as familiar, and I haven't experienced it having regulatory authority over vibrations. I don't think it actually does. So, but I would leave it to the town to decide if that's adequate. I mean, I can speak to how that works generally, but, I perused the bylaw quickly, and it does seem to go beyond what our regulations include, which is typically the reason why localities look to bylaws.
I mean, the regulation at the state level isn't going to get into how many truck trips per day or things like that, but just in terms of, from an overview standpoint, if there had to be some enforcement being done, I'm just trying to understand if, do we need more teeth? And so,
State regulation does not regulate mobile sources.
Is there any other comment on the motion I made? Hearing that, Joe, yes.
I have a general question, just out of curiosity. Did any member of the panel have any involvement in drafting this article?
No.
And Joe, I didn't. No, I know, I'm just being clear.
It was shared with me before it went to the Board of Selectmen, but no.
And in openness, it was provided to me ahead of time last week, just as a heads up.
Is there a second for my motion?
Second.
Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All against? Hearing none, I need to do a count to make sure we have 11. All in favor, raise your hand. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. The motion fails,
As predicted.
and as usual. And just one more compelling reason, for something as simple as this, that perhaps the legislation next week should be paid attention to. Now we're on to public comment period. We ran a little long. I think it was necessary tonight. We're going to go 10 minutes long on the meeting, so there'll be 20 minutes.
What about old business?
Old business, I'm sorry, Joe, I did jump over that. Do you have an old business topic?
Yeah, and I had mentioned it to you a couple of weeks ago.
Mhm.
At our last meetings, we had some discussions, general and specific, about whether the work groups should start meeting again to discuss additional issues. I had made mention that I thought the PSDAR work group should meet at least once to address that, see if there are new issues to address. Two of the members of the panel disagreed. And on our way out of the last meeting, Dave and I had a conversation, and David mentioned to me that the PSDAR contains very little detail, the one filed by Holtec, or in general they do, and/or once the actual decommissioning begins, the process begins, that the document is largely irrelevant. Well, I contacted Patrick as one of our panel members and representative of Holtec and asked him whether they had to take the PSAR requirement of the NRC seriously, and obviously the response was yes, they had to, because it was a requirement of the NRC. I then also contacted, and you know her, Sean, Amy, with the NRC in Washington, and she has attended some of the public meetings of the NRC here in Plymouth in the past, and asked her. Well, also, just as general information, as of the 6th of this month, Amy is now the new project director for the decommissioning of the Pilgrim facility. I've not seen any public announcement to that extent, but she told me that occurred on the 6th of this month. The Region 1 of the NRC will still be doing their oversight work with their field inspectors and so forth for the decommissioning process. That won't change, but she's the project director. And I said to her, Amy, look, there's some discussion of the relevance of the PSDAR by a licensee. And I said, is it, even though the NRC requires it of decommissioning licensees, is it really that important enough document? And does the NRC use it? And she said, absolutely. We wouldn't require it and have all our rules that spell out very definitively what all the regulatory and sub-regulatory requirements are that the licensee has to respond to in drafting their PSDAR document, and our field inspectors use it as a monitoring tool when they do their visits and inspections of the licensee during the decommissioning process. During the past 2.5 years, we have discussed our working groups for the first year, and not so much the second year, have discussed all of the major issues that the panel believes needed to be brought out and discussed. We narrowed them down and included them in our annual reports and forwarded those as required by our enabling legislation. As such, my view now of the working groups and the PSDAR in specific would be there's no need for these working groups to continue meeting unless there is new information to be discussed and to researched to bring back to the panel. Short of that, I see no reason to reinvent the wheel in everything we've discussed for the past 2.5 years. New information, different, however. So therefore, unless we've got new information, and there appears to be new information being generated on this whole canister issue and dry cask issue and so forth. But on a lot of these other issues, or maybe all of them, we've already beaten them to death and submitted our recommendations. We've never had any official responses from the recipients required by our enabling legislation. So we don't need to reinvent the wheel. So as such, at least from the PSDAR standpoint, the work group standpoint, I have no intention of resurrecting that work group unless and until new information surfaces on any of the issues involved and we decide, okay, let's sit down and see if there's something new to discuss and bring back to the panel.
Okay. Any comment? I'm in agreement with you, by the way. Any comment? Hearing none, so it shall be. We shall not. Any other old business that I neglected to bring up? Hearing none? We're going to do 20 minutes of public comment. We'll run approximately 15 minutes over tonight. I apologize for that. How many people would like to speak? We have one. 1, 2, 3, 4. 5 minutes each. Sir, we'll start tonight.
Same thing, Joe Gurley, Hingham? Thank you. Thank you,
Nice
this was awesome, very grateful to you, sir. I just have a question, you said the cast here are no different than in Vermont. Well, where the cast is being cooled with salt air, does that exacerbate the corrosion problem?
There are studies that have
Thank
been
you.
done that I think the plant over in South Africa on the coast is certainly San Onofre, Diablo, yes.
So salt
Green environment.
would make it faster, the corrosion. And the health executive in England said that magnesium makes it go faster as well, would corrode it faster. You don't,
Qualified to comment.
you don't know that? Okay. And I was wondering if Plymouth uses magnesium in their road salts. kind of a current thing, so that's like a double whammy in that area. If the casks are really bringing in that much moisture to clean it off, is it like a double whammy on the steel? That's my concern.
No idea.
No idea. Something to look at though, right? Sounds pretty scary. Thank you.
Thank you. Diane?
I just wanted to ask if people understood that Holtec was given an NRC exemption for their concrete, from ASME certification for their concrete. And also, if that concrete fails, the warranty for the steel canister is void. Okay. And also, I want to remind people that Holtec hid the problems with the canisters at San Onofre. Okay, and so I also wanted to let you know, too, that Cape Town Windows has asked in the past, years ago, Senator Markey and Representative Keating to amend the Atomic Energy Act, which has been amended many times, to allow the state to have authority over safety, and that was refused. Also, Millstone has continuous monitoring, and it's available on a website, and we did ask for legislation to be submitted to have continuous monitoring at Pilgrim, and it never passed. And now I want to thank Ms. Powers from MEMA for writing that letter to the NRC, asking that the 10 miles remain, the 10-mile emergency planning zone remain. But my question is, why is there no discussion about keeping the 50-mile emergency planning zone, considering we have the dry cask dangers and also the spent fuel pool, which is a very serious danger? So I'm wondering why there isn't a 50-mile emergency planning zone being maintained, too, in the request for the 10-mile to be maintained.
Well, the 10-mile wasn't approved.
No, but you, as MEMA, asked that the 10-mile remain.
My primary concern is the 10-mile. That's where the majority of our planning and training and exercising occurs.
Mhm.
There's far less exercising and planning that's required for the 50 and
Right.
for ingestion pathway.
Mhm.
So our focus has always been the 10-mile.
Okay, but again, my question is, because of, you have the shadow evacuation zone, which is 10 to 15 miles, which is a traffic control area that does touch Cape Cod, where the bridges will be closed if there is an evacuation, a need for an evacuation, and that is not being addressed at all, anywhere, not even in legislation at the State House. We've disappeared.
Right, but so our 10-mile zone is established by the Nuclear Regulatory
Mhm.
Commission. I'm not really following what your question is.
Okay,
Like,
the state also has a 10-mile emergency planning zone, but the Nuclear Regulatory
that's the
Commission
same.
is 10 miles, but there's also a 50-mile ingestion pathway zone, but within that 50 miles is a 10 to 15-mile shadow evacuation, where the NRC totally ignores that would even occur, but MEMA is not paying attention to that either.
Are you articulating a 10 to 15-mile personal view on a shadow evacuation zone? I'm not, but we
Okay.
don't have plans for a 10 to 15-mile
Okay.
shadow evacuation.
That's where the roads are going to be blocked and the bridges are going to be closed on Cape Cod. And the traffic control points are in Sandwich and in Bourne, and it affects Cape Cod. And if you only are doing a 10-mile planning zone, you've completely ignored all of those traffic control points that really are integral to a 10-mile emergency planning zone. If you plan to evacuate people, if there's a fire at the spent fuel pool and you have to evacuate folks, you need a 50-mile emergency planning zone to be included in that too. So I'm asking, why is it not included?
Well, none of it's being included now, so.
Again, I'm sorry, let me reframe. Why did MEMA ask for a 10-mile emergency?
Because my primary concern is the 10-mile emergency planning zone that has been in place for years. And that's where the majority of our planning has focused. We have communities that we've done evacuation planning with. We have reception centers. We do training and exercises. We have not extended those requirements to that 5-mile buffer. We then would refer to the state's evacuation planning, state-initiated shelter strategies, and our partnership with local communities that exists all the time.
Okay, so do you think that people in the 50-mile emergency planning zone are no longer at risk from a spent fuel pool fire or a dry cask problem?
I'm not, I asked for the 10-mile to remain in place.
Right.
That was not granted.
I understand that,
So-
but you only asked for 10 miles, so let me just ask.
I could, right, but
Because you only asked for 10 miles and not the 50 miles, is MEMA saying that the people who live from 10 miles out to 50 miles out are no longer at risk?
I
A yes or a no?
think the risk is reduced. That's why we
We're
focused
still at
on the
risk, though.
10-mile.
We're still at risk, though.
Sure, but
Okay.
I think the deduction of this argument is if you didn't get 10, how would we have, if I write a letter tomorrow to say we want 50-mile, I don't know
No,
how
keeping
that.
both emergency planning zones, that's what I'm saying. And I'm speaking for people on Cape Cod because we are being ignored in this effort.
Thank you,
And
Dan.
even at the State House, too.
Thank you. Henrietta?
I guess my takeaway from Mr. Bunch's presentation is that that we really have a very, very serious problem with the Holtec casks. So my question is, if we cannot hope to replace the current inadequate casks, which will last, we have no idea how long they'll last, but decades and centuries and millennia less than the actual toxic contents. If we can't trust those casks, and this is a question for the NDCAP panel, I guess, what do we do about it? What do we do about it? What is our best strategy to protect ourselves given horrifically inadequate casks? Should we be working to get them burned and safely entombed underground in some high spot? What should we do? I mean, this is like, we've learned that we have a ticking time bomb of monstrous proportions. We have no assurance that the casks are going to work. What can we ask for that has a prayer? I take your point about the political impasse that we're at, but that doesn't help us right now. So our charge is to assure that the decommissioning is as safe as possible here in Plymouth. And of course, we have to be mindful that this is a challenge that's going to roll right across the country, and pretty soon, in 20 years, the entire country is going to be engulfed with the horror that we are now facing. But what should we be asking right now? That's my question. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Henrietta. Mary?
Mary Lampert, Duxbury. One of the takeaways from tonight was that the NRC is not necessarily our best friend as far as securing safety. I think that was loud and clear. Clearly, with the exemptions that we've received for emergency planning, for cyber, for liability, that's just an example. It shows that the doors on the federal level are essentially closed, bolted, locked, secured. So therefore, the state is the next door to knock on. And as Sean pointed out, there are important bills that are still in committee, such as H3492 on emergency planning to require funding for planning. The bill says until the pool is emptied, it could be amended later on if it got out of committee to ratchet it down, which would be appropriate once in canisters. This bill is in the Committee of Public Health. The state has authority. It has authority to deal with economic concerns. That's not prohibited. There is Supreme case law after Supreme case law. And so it would seem that it would be the interest of MEMA to speak to the committee chairs. It would be the interest of the various communities to do the same thing. This would have the licensee responsible for payment of emergency planning expenses, radiological emergency planning expenses, because we know from Commissioner Barron, NRC Commissioner Barron's testimony, dissent from the NRC decision, that the regular emergency plans are inadequate for a radiological event. There are other important bills, as Sean mentioned. Again, the bill that would require $25 million from the licensee per year to be put in the treasurer's office as really an insurance to build over the years in case the decommissioning trust fund money runs short. So we would be left less of an amount when we're holding the bag as the state. If the DTF is sufficient, then that money with interest would go back to Holtec. Again, that is a money bill. That means that the state has the authority to enact that bill. That clearly would be in the economic interest. There are other bills for funding, monitoring at Mass Department of Public Health. They, too, have not gotten out of committee. It would be to the benefit of the public, I would think, to speak in favor of it. Clearly, the bill that's in TUE coming up next week that would improve the functioning of this committee is something that is in everybody's interest, because this committee has a certain amount of sway. And however, if you can't take a vote, ever, your influence is clearly diminished. So I think it would behooves both the public and certainly the various sections of the administration to deal with this. It's all about money. Money's short, and we need money, and we are not going to get cooperation from the NRC. That's clear. So it's time to go knocking on the state doors and to do it collectively. My wish list for spent fuel, which was the other subject of discussion, there are things we could hope to perhaps negotiate, talk with Holtec about. The biggest wish, in my mind, is try to prevent a line of sight attack, looking at where the ISFSI is being placed by a public road. This is something that could be dirt cheap, erect a earthen berm. That is something that could be doable.
Thank you,
And that
Mary.
could go a long way.
Thank
And monitoring. And thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you.
Sean, I have a
Yes,
question for Mary.
absolutely.
Mary, I just had a question. Do you have a sense in terms of the?
Do I have sense? Well, it's questionable.
I said a lot of sense, monetarily and otherwise. No, but do you have a sense of, I know a lot of these legislative bills have been kicked around and never passed over the last number of years, and for various reasons. Sounds like it's more political from what you've told me, but the IWG and the state at Holtec have been undergoing some sort of negotiations on a lot of different topics. I'm just wondering, do you have a sense of any overlap between what's in some of the legislative bills and versus what you may have heard publicly discussed in terms of what the IWG has been working on and looking into in terms of trying to work out some sort of negotiation behind the scenes with that if
Well,
one doesn't
as-
work, another might work. I guess Just curious your opinion.
Well, remember, there are two parties in litigation. There is the Attorney
Pilgrim
General,
Watch, too,
and
yeah.
there's Pilgrim
Right.
Watch. Pilgrim Watch is not part of these negotiations. Depending if the negotiations work out, and we found them agreeable for everything we want, then we would take our case and go home. However, if it does not include what we want, then we would continue to pursue even if the AG decided otherwise not to. And so there are carrots and there are sticks. So that's one thing. But I take Holtec at their word. And they have said repeatedly that they will follow NRC requirements. NRC requires 25 milliram, not less than 10. That's just one example. And so, is that part of the settlement? Who knows? But I think it's time for the state, again, I'm knocking on the state's door, for the state to make a regulation requiring less than 10 and less than 4. They're capable of doing that.
Thank you.
I don't know what the problem is.
Thank you, Mary. Do I hear a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second? All in favor? Aye. All opposed? Motion passes, thank you. For that one, we do.